Geometry, Unit 3, Lesson 2. I can determine whether or not a figure is a parallelogram based on given information. So, do we have a parallelogram? And there's 5 ways that we can say yes, and 4 of them we already know from the previous lesson. Here's the old evidence, and I'm going to mark up as I go. One way you know that you have a parallelogram is if the opposite sides are parallel. So if this side here and this side here are parallel, and these are parallel, you have to have a parallelogram. Another way you can tell is if opposite sides are congruent. So, for example, if this side and this side, which are opposites, are congruent, and this side, the only way that these can fit together is to make a parallelogram. So we know those properties, those rules from yesterday. What about opposite angles? Well, opposite angles can also be congruent. So those are opposite angles, and if they're congruent, and these opposite angles are congruent, then again, you have a parallelogram. And finally, diagonals, if they bisect each other, then we have a parallelogram. So those are some rules we learned in our previous lesson. Now, there's one more new piece of evidence. If you look down here, I just sketched 2 lines here, and notice it's given that they're parallel. So let's just look at this. Do we have enough evidence to say that these, that the quadrilateral I'm going to make here is a parallelogram? So you're going to sketch the missing line segments. So I'm missing one over here, so I'm going to go from here to here. Okay? So I'm going to sketch this in. I'm going to sketch the other one in. Is that a parallelogram? Well, one pair of sides is parallel, but the other one clearly is not. Notice these aren't the same length. So no, that's not a parallelogram because both pairs of sides would have to be parallel, and these would eventually intersect each other. Let's complete this other set of given info. Notice how this one pair of sides are congruent. But if I complete them, well, these aren't parallel and neither are these. And these aren't congruent. So that doesn't make a parallelogram either. So I'm going to say no to that. Now I come over here. Look what the given is. You have one pair of opposite sides are parallel and they're congruent. That same pair. And if you go ahead, if they're the same length and they're parallel and you complete your quadrilateral, the only way you can add these segments in is to make them parallel. So this does work. This is a parallelogram. So what kind of reasoning did we just use? Inductive, because we did a lot of experiments to look for a pattern. So the 5th example is this one here. One pair of opposite sides are parallel and congruent, to go with our other 4 opportunities to say a quadrilateral is a parallelogram. Let's take these ideas and let's just run through a few to make sure you feel okay with it. So if you look at this one here, do a couple practice problems. Do we have enough evidence to say that this quadrilateral is a parallelogram? And I have to justify my answer. So if you look at this first one, notice we're dealing with diagonals, and you remember that diagonals are supposed to bisect each other. So this has been bisected. That's great. But are these right here congruent? No. These are different. They should both be the same, like these. So the answer is no. Okay? There's not enough evidence here to say I have a quadrilateral because the diagonals do not bisect each other. They don't both bisect. One of them does, the other one doesn't. Look at this one. Is this enough evidence? Opposite sides are congruent. So yes, it is. Yes, because opposite sides are congruent. And so you need to go through the rest of these and think about the rules we just learned and see if what the evidence markings here show you meet those rules. So we can do one more. Take a look. Do we have enough evidence? Well, this pair of opposite sides is congruent. This pair of opposite sides is parallel, but if you look back in your notes, they need to be the same. Like this would need to be parallel to this and congruent. They can't be on different pairs. So this is no, because we need one pair of opposite sides parallel and congruent. So if this had the parallel marking with this one and they were congruent, we'd be good to go. So make sure you use your notes. And today's program, the lesson, is you really want to know which pieces of evidence will allow you to say, yes, these meet the needs to be a parallelogram. Later on, we'll bring algebra into the mix. For example, on this one, to make this a parallelogram, what do we know? Well, if you extend your lines, and you cover this up, if these are going to be parallel, what do I know about the relationship here? That's right, they sum up to 180. See the picture in a picture, so you can go ahead and write an equation and figure out what the x value is that would give you 180. So this could be a parallelogram. Okay, good luck.